The group of G77+China summit has wrapped up in the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Leaders agreed to move forward as a bloc in order to promote South-South cooperation and solidarity. CGTN's Nick Mulimba has more.
The G77+China summit came to a close on Monday with calls for unity among the more than 130 member states. China's commitment in the South-South cooperation was cemented by an emphatic assurance of unwavering support.
China has always worked with the South countries to uphold international justice and equity and defend our common rights and interests in development, setting up a shining example of equality and sincere mutual assistance among the countries of the South, and blazing a broad path towards common development. Last month, China held the Central Conference on work relating to foreign affairs. This meeting is quite important, of quite relevance here, because the meeting has clearly pointed out that building a community with a shared future for mankind is the noble goal pursued by China.
The member states agreed on key principles to ensure sustainable prosperity. These include consistency in production of goods and services, trade, and improved infrastructure.
But this assumes that we have peace among ourselves, which is another issue. Because if we don't have peace, then we shall not achieve this. So I would have to be in touch with some of the brothers and sisters who have got tensions or even conflict, to see how win-win solutions can be found.
The G77+China summit also ignited an impetus for its members to band together at the United Nations. But how will they do that?
In more than 50 years, the UN has never seen reform. This is an opportunity. And the group of 77 and China will be at the center of those negotiations. We are talking about sustainable development, international peace and security, digital compact, youth. We're going to really be at the center of it. We will use our number to negotiate hard for the interests of developing countries.
Tough immigration policies and visa restrictions were also part of key discussions with member states, as well as easing business barriers.
The most important thing is for us to be united and to expand cooperation with our border, expand as many sectors as possible. And of course, economic, trade, socioculture, and people-to-people contact would be important factor for the advancements of South-South cooperation.
Heads of states and government are upbeat about the numbers they have, even as the summit of the future awaits in September, assuring them of a bargaining power. Countries in the G77 are leaving Uganda with their heads high after a resolution that will hopefully bring prosperity and affluence in the coming month. But all eyes will now be centered in the summit of the future. Nick Mulimba, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
All right, for a better understanding of the significance of the outcomes of the just concluded Third South Summit in Uganda, we are joined by Professor Peter Kagwanja, the President and Chief Executive of the Africa Policy Institute, via Zoom from Nairobi. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Let me begin by asking you, what, in your view, are some of the significant outcomes from the just concluded Third South Summit?
Thank you very much. The concluded G77 summit has highlighted the key important issues: the situation in the South, where youth unemployment is a key issue, deepening poverty against the background of COVID-19, and also the need for peace and unity in order to underpin development, the need to grow trade, expand trade with other major powers in order to bring about prosperity, and this prosperity to be shared. And finally, we're talking about enablers of development, such as infrastructure, as key issues that need to be done. So this really focuses on what is central to the developing countries of the South. And therefore, that is why the meeting has been hailed as very, very important. It's really seminal in terms of shaping the future of the South.
All right, Professor, very important points that you've highlighted there. That leads me nicely to my next question. Though not a fully fledged member, China has been heavily supportive of the G77+China initiatives. What has been the impact of China's involvement in this Global South group is the question.
Now, the most important thing to note about China is its very commitment to the South as first a geopolitical imperative and also its own development imperative. China is the only developing countries, a country that has entered the realm of what you can call a great power or superpower. And therefore, it still has solidarity with where it comes from, which is the South. Two, China has dedicated a key infrastructure to uplift the South. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, focusing on Africa, the Asia Development Bank, among others, that it has put a credible infrastructure to uplift the South, focusing primarily on connectivity, particularly infrastructure, and has invested heavily on the same. You just need to look at Africa itself. In the last 6 years, or so to say, it has put in place almost $12 billion dollars in order to uplift Africa alone. And Africa is a key member of the South and the poorer part of that South. And therefore, China's contribution to the G77 plus China and contribution to the South-South cooperation in development is key. And I don't see any other opportunity given the global financial situation other than China devoting more and more resources to uplift its, its folk in the South, because it's the South is the fastest developing country. It is still a member of the South.
All right, Professor, in light of what you've just said, Professor, how is multilateralism likely to lead to a beneficial realignment of the traditional world order?
Obviously, what is emerging is that the old multilateral order, which rose in 1945 out of what were called the Bretton Woods conferences, has created a global infrastructure which is hegemonic and which has been largely dominated by the West. What China, India, Russia, and other countries of the South are doing is to democratize the international governance. And by so doing, creating other infrastructure or empowering existing global multilateral institutions like the G77, which now contain 80% of the global population, in order to basically even out issues in terms of global parity. So far, we have an extraordinary domination by the West in terms of multilateral decision making, yet the people bearing the brunt of the international order are actually the countries of the South, those that constitute 80% of the human population today. Therefore, strengthening multilateralism and making it more democratic, equitable, and representative of the human population is what is at issue. And I think that's what China is pushing for. That is what India has been pushing for. And that's what the countries of the G77 are pushing for, an equitable world order.
All right, Professor, one final question, if you would indulge me now. African countries have for many years been advocating for representation in the UN Security Council. My question to you is this goal achievable?
Yes, it is highly achievable. Already Africa is represented in the UN Security Council by 3 members. And these 3 members are agreed upon by the African Union. So if the rest of the world has not dealt with the question of global hegemony, Africa has done that. So we, every year, elect members who represent us in the UN Security Council. The problem is that these are non-permanent members. We need to make the 3 seats for Africa permanent. That's all. And Africa's problem will be solved. If we want for more seats, that will deal with that. But for now, what is the problem is the inequitability of representation in US Security Council, where some 5 members that emerged from the Second World as victors have established a victors' order based on the veto. We need to abolish the victors' order and have an order that is representing the global community. And Africa has already charted the path. We need to make the 3 seats that are African permanent. And if you insist on veto, let them also have veto. Our idea is a UN without vetoes. Why should you give certain countries vetoes and not others? Thanks to China, because at least it has used its veto in support of developing countries like in Africa. But the order that we need in the future is where all countries are equal. All countries have equal representation. And all regions, like for example in Africa, are represented in the Security Council. Yes, it is possible for Africa to be represented in the UN Security Council in a fair, just, and equitable world.